In this video we're going to be looking at the Fedora KDE desktop. Now, as you know, the default Fedora distribution ships with a Gnome based GUI as its front end. However, there is a different version of Fedora which has the KDE desktop on it, and it's known as the Fedora KDE Spin. Now, in this video we'll be looking at Fedora 16 KDE Spin, which is obviously the Fedora 16 system with a KDE interface front end. The Fedora 16 interface uses the latest KDE desktop known as Plasma, and so that's what we'll be looking at here. Okay, the KDE desktop is known as a power user's desktop because of the amount of configurability that's built into the system. It is designed to be ultimately flexible, but of course with that flexibility comes a degree of complexity, and so you should be prepared to put in a modest amount of time to get to know the system if you want to get the best out of it. That's not to say that KDE is not usable straight out of the box. In this demo we'll be just using it in vanilla flavor as it comes out of the distribution, and as you can see it's certainly a very nice looking interface. But what I would say is that if you're going to go to the time of moving on to KDE from something like Gnome, you really won't see a great deal of difference until you get into the depths of the system and start configuring and changing the desktop to work the way that you want it. So let's get started and just take a tour around the desktop. So let's start up here in the right hand corner with what's known as the desktop cashew. Okay, so if we click on this, what we'll have is a menu that allows us to configure the desktop to however we want it. So we can add panels, we can add widgets and various things around here. We can then add our changes to the activities manager, which we'll come to later. We can set up shortcuts, etc., etc. And when we're finished with it and it's all working nicely, we can lock the widgets so there are no accidental changes here. Okay, so we click back on the desktop icon to hide that menu. If we right click on any blank area of the screen, we get what is known as the context menu. So this gives us some shortcuts to commonly used functions such as the console, the command line. Allows us to run a script without actually dropping to the command line. We can do some basic desktop configuration. We can launch the activity manager, and we can, for instance, shut down the system, etc. Click away from the menu to close it. That's the context menu. Over here we see an icon on the screen here. In fact, we see an icon within a folder, and that's this kind of grayed out box here. This is the folder. This is actually, when we go into the file manager, you'll see that this is the desktop folder. So anything we then move into the desktop folder will appear as an icon within this grey box here. So the only option we've got here on the screen is to install the operating system to our hard drive. Now at the moment I am running Fedora from, it's a 4 gig USB stick, and we're running it in live CD mode without actually installing it onto our system. So this is exactly as it comes out the box. Your main interaction with KDE is always going to be through this bottom line of the screen, known as the KDE Panel. So if we go through this from left to right, over here on the extreme left of the screen you'll see the Fedora logo here. If we click on that, this launches what's known as the main menu, and across the main menu we've got these 5 options which give us different views of the system. Okay, so immediately over here on the left we have our favorites. So in here you can move in your favorite applications so that they are all in one place and they're easy to find. If you haven't actually had chance to move them into your favorites, you can find applications down here on this applications tab. So for instance, if we know we're after a graphics application, we can click on the graphics option and then we can find the program from here. Similarly, if we're after an internet application, we can click on the internet option and we can scroll up and down and find the actual application that we want. The next option is called the computer option, and this gives us some common admin functions. So we've got the run command here, we've got our system information, system settings, and we've got access to commonly used folders on the system such as the home and root, etc., and the trash can. The next option is called the recently used, and if you look up here, all this does is, if I've used the things during the last couple of sessions, they'll be listed down here. So this is quite useful if, for instance, you've opened a window and then closed it by accident and realized that you need to reopen it again. You can just come down here into the recently used, find it. For instance, here's the file manager or the web browser, and I can click on these and it will just pull it back up again. Finally, we have the leave option. This gives us all the options for logging out, for locking our terminal, switching to a new user, for sending the computer into power save modes, and for rebooting and shutting down the system. Okay, if you don't want any of the options on the main menu, just click away from it on the desktop and it will disappear. The icon immediately to the right of the Fedora icon activates what's known as the Activity Manager. Okay, so if we click on that, it brings up this short window just above the KDE panel here, and there are by default these 4 different views. Now when we first boot into Fedora, it will give us the desktop view, which is what we've got here. But we have a number of other ways we can display our system. One, we can just forget the folders here. So for instance, here on the default view we've got the folder and then the icons. If we don't like the containing folder being displayed on the screen, we can just click on the icon view and we can just have the bare icons listed here. The one I use the most probably is called Search and Launch. Okay, and this one is geared towards finding and launching applications. So for instance, if we're in this view and we click away from here, for instance, we can go and look for, we know our application starts with KON, we can just type KON in here, and up here we have all the applications installed on the system that have the string KON in them. So see, we've got console, Conqueror, conversation, etc. Okay, so if I want to start any of these, all I need to do is just click on them and they'll start up for us. There we go. Okay, I don't really want to start that, so I think I'll just click that down. As you can note here, what happens is once you activate a view in the Activities Manager, that view remains current from then onwards until you change it to a different view. So here we go, we're still in the Search and Find view. So if I go back up here and change it back, I can change it back to my desktop view, or I can change it to the only other one we haven't looked at, which is called the Photos activity, and this is geared more towards photographers, and it just allows you to find and display your photos easily. So I'm just going to go back to the default desktop view here. One other thing to note is if you don't like any of these 4 views, you can create your own view. As we said earlier, KDE is ultimately configurable, so you can just click on this and you can add extra widgets and make it look exactly how you want and save it down here as your own custom views. And you can create as many as you like there and then click between them whenever you need them. To come out of the Activity Manager, just click on this X in the corner, top right hand corner of its window. So that's the Activities Manager. This central part of the screen is called the Task Manager, and this is where all your minimized applications sit. So for instance here I've just got my terminal window. As you can see, I'm running FFmpeg and capturing the screen in that window. If we brought up another window, let's take up our web browser here. Okay, and the web browser by default in Fedora KDE is Conqueror. So as in most GUIs, the windows can be resized to the size that you want them, however you like them. You can maximize the window by clicking on this icon, or minimize it by clicking on that icon. And minimized windows always go down to this File Manager section of the KDE panel. Just click back on them to activate them and display them on the desktop again. Over here on the right hand side is what's known as the System panel. So the first icon by default you'll see is called the Notifications. If the system has any notifications, they pop up here. As you can see here, we've got some notifications from the power management system and from the networking, etc. Okay, so if you had any errors, for instance, they would pop up here, or if you had any jobs that you executed, then their completion or error status would be displayed in that window. That's kind of a neat way of compartmentalizing all that sort of interaction into a single icon. Now down here we have the clipboard content, so not terribly useful, but it does show you the history of all your clipboard, all your cut and paste activity here. You can edit it, you can get rid of some of the entries, you can clear your clipboards altogether, and do all the normal cut and paste operations. So I'm just going to click away from that again. Next icon down here is the speaker volume, so change this to the level you want, so you can actually hear the sounds to your liking. To the right of that we have the networking interface. We click on that and you can check the status and indeed configure your connection. To the right we have this caret. If we click on it, it will display all the icons that can't actually be displayed on the screen currently because there's no room for them. So for instance we've got our battery status here. Okay, so it's 98% charge, which is always good to know. Next we have our local time and access to the calendar if we click on it. So unfortunately this doesn't hyperlink into our organizer application like the Gnome version does, so I'll click back on the time to hide the calendar. And finally this KDE Panel cashew here, if I click on that, this allows me to configure the way this panel looks, the order that the icons appear in, and which icons indeed appear on the screen. So if I go into here, I can add widgets for instance, and let's go along here and see if we can just add something. Okay, so let's pick out the console. If I want to put a console window here, I can just pick this up, I can drag it down, and I can put it where I want it to appear in the KDE panel, so just to the right of the activity manager, and I can release it, and there's my icon there. Okay, so that's the desktop. Let's take a look at the file manager now. So if I go into the file manager, the default file manager for Fedora KDE is Dolphin, the same as Simply Mepis, which is also based on KDE. Again, if you click on a folder, you'll navigate down into it. Unfortunately, there aren't any icons in that folder. Let's click down on here into the desktop folder. As you can see, here's our live install icon within our desktop folder. If you have a file that is not a folder, so for instance we've got this video down here, screen grab, we can just single click it in order to actually invoke it. So in this case it's going to pull up the Dragon player. As you can see here is some of my testing from the screen grab earlier on. And if for instance we want one of these files on the desktop, we can either pick them up and drag them to the desktop, release them and create them as an icon here, and then when we click on this it will actually invoke Dragon Player with that file, or we can just get rid of it by clicking on this X. Alternatively, if we want it to appear in this this folder here, what we can do is we can just pick this up, drag it across and place it in the desktop folder, and let's copy. Okay, and we can see now it appears in the folder here. If we just take that down, again, if we right click this, we can get various options what to do with it, one of which is move to trash if we don't actually want it there anymore. Okay, we get a confirmation. I can say yes please, move to trash. And if we go back here now, click on the trash icon, we can see here are the files that I deleted from the desktop, the shortcuts. So that's the Fedora KDE desktop. As I said before, you get out from it basically what you're prepared to put into it, but it's usable straight out of the box, and indeed it's really quite slick. But you know, the ultimate power is if you're willing to invest the time and to reconfigure the desktop exactly how you like it, then really that's where the power of KDE is and the advantage over Gnome. Okay, so that's about all we've got time for, so thanks again for listening.